I spoke to Orla Dempsey in the last episode about leadership in the education system in Ireland, teachers' experiences, and how it's very similar to other organisations and industries in terms of the gap that can be there between how senior leadership perceive they're doing and how people feel they're doing. But also, one of the main things that really struck me in the conversation with Orla is that there is often a gap in understanding the needs of people who supply the service that we're focused on. So, for instance, if you're a student focused organization, university, education, institute, then you can sometimes forget that there are administration staff as well as teachers or lecturers delivering the information, and that how they feel has a direct impact on what they do, how they make decisions, how they interact with people. And I thought that that was quite interesting because we see that happen across different industries. We see it in nursing. We see that nurses are underpaid and actually patient care is center of decisions, which it should be. But if you don't account for the stakeholders who deliver that care and their unmet needs, then you're going to find gaps in that. And that again is through other industries. If you've got a lot of middle managers putting pressure on their teams, but their teams aren't being supported to deliver the customer service, then you find this gap occurs and you find that people are challenged by it, but also can become resentful. One of the things I've noticed is if I do training around inclusive leadership with a group and that group do not experience inclusion, it is much more difficult for them to implement inclusion when they themselves aren't feeling included. And that does go back to how power is sourced and shared and resourced. But it is important to remember that whenever we're trying to focus on a particular outcome, like a student outcome or a consumer outcome, we need to think about the stakeholders who deliver the outcome and not just the stakeholders in decision making positions, but actually the stakeholders who actually deliver the work in some way. And I guess that does lend to my own preference for dialogic organizational development, an approach to development that says when we talk to people and we change the types of conversations we're having, organizations are living systems that can move and shift and adapt. But if we keep doing planned change to people in organizations, then that's where you get a lot more of the resistance and the failed attempts. The challenge with that is power. If you believe that being in a leadership position gives you ultimate power, then it's going to be really hard for you to work inclusively or distribute leadership because you're hanging on to the power. And I don't think that's any individual's fault. I think often what happens is that individuals have learned about power and leadership from a particular lens and they repeat it. And that's something that we talk about in the Leadership Book Club every month. Whenever we are reviewing a book, we've read the book, we've thought about applying it to our own area, we have discussions about it, but then we look at it and we kind of try to understand the basic assumptions the author or the book is building its point on. Are these assumptions inherently unequal? Are they privileging a particular point of view, a particular norm? Are they acknowledging the limitations to their approach? Like there's some books that have been written for lots of different types of leaders, but they're still positioning a particular style of leadership as the right leadership, and also often using what we call a weird lens, weird being Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, and that this lens is quite dominant in leadership theory that is published in academia or is discussed commercially amongst leadership specialists and coaches and so on. We often try to understand what's underneath that and to ask ourselves if that is the most effective style of leadership or if what is being propositioned only works for certain people in certain parts of the world or certain organizations or certain identities. And we also try to find books that are discussing views on leadership that aren't privileged as much, are different, come from a different place, position leadership differently. And so when I was talking to Orla about the data that she collected, and it's quite significant, it was quite impressive that somebody, independent practitioner working in the space, would be able to facilitate a survey of that size. Over 200 participants took part in the survey. And from that, Orla was able to glean a kind of a overview of what's happening and how teachers feel about leadership in their day-to-day work. The other thing that I thought was interesting about the conversation with Orla, and I think that I really appreciated, was that as we were speaking, it was clear that Orla was like, oh yeah, that's actually something I can do with that, or oh, actually I need to compare that to get that information. So when we were discussing it, Orla was actually actively thinking about how this research can really have an impact. And I really like that, bringing something from a basic assumption of data or basic collection of data into what does that mean in the wider context. And I think for leadership, that's really important because there are significant differences between industries and organizations for lots of different reasons. But there are also some core things that are common, like it is a social system. Any organization or school is a social system, and it's moving, and the rules and the boundaries of it are always shifting. It's not stagnant. It doesn't freeze at any point. It's continuously moving and shifting. And I think understanding that about organizations and that power is attained in two different ways for leaders. One is authority. So you've got your power through a title in some way. And then also there's the social power, which lots of informal leaders have as well as formal leaders. But this is the power that people give to you and follow you and are influenced by you because they trust you or they believe in what you're sharing. And Orla was talking about that as well, a little bit about that's kind of a piece of work that she does, expanding your view of leadership. I really like that. I think that it would probably be really helpful for all of us to expand our views on anything, not just on leadership. And then the other part that kind of really struck me after the conversation with Orla was this idea of the gap that exists for teachers. So a high percentage, over 80%, you'll have to go back and listen to the episode, but over 80% had witnessed somebody leave teaching, and over 80% had witnessed somebody burn out because of teaching. And if we think about the expectations on teachers now, and I'm, as somebody who, I'll share in a moment my position on the education system in Ireland, but I was quite touched by that because if that level of engagement, if burnout was happening in any other industry, in any other organization, at that level, at that rate, we would be doing massive employee engagement and well-being interventions. And I think this is where teachers can be caught because they're working for the state. That's true. However, they're also working within little sections, little organizations in and of themselves. And those organizations have influences and impacts on how they experience their work. But also, I remember saying to a teacher recently that it is a teacher's responsibility to be able to handle difficult conversations. And we've had a couple of interesting things happen in Ireland around teachers and things they say and do in classrooms, where there's different types of court rulings occurring. But I do believe that teachers, because they're spending so much time with the young people of Ireland and the young people of any country, need a level of responsibility towards the type of people they're developing, not just the subject that they're teaching. And also, the teacher pointed out to me, which I was really grateful for, they're not taught that. And I thought that that was a really significant point. Teachers are often taught about the subject matter and what they've to teach. And then additionally, they may take on other social responsibilities within the school, or they may personally be motivated to understand or learn something and then try to facilitate better experiences. But if your staff are burning out, they're not going to have that extra energy to think about the well-being and the personhood of the students in front of them. And how can we ask that of a group of professionals when they themselves aren't having their needs met? And this is why it loops back to inclusive leadership to me all the time, besides the fact that I'm up to my eyeballs in reading the research on it. If I'm asking a group of people to do something, they'll usually start by finding out if they've experienced it elsewhere because they're trying to role model it and they want to see and experience it. But also, there can be a resentment if they're required to deliver it. You turn the tables, they're not experiencing it. So they think, why should it start here? Shouldn't it start somewhere else? But that's actually true for everyone. Like if I talk to really senior leaders, they say, well, I can't do that because the industry does this, or I can't do that because regulations do that. Everybody is always wondering if they're getting the treatment they're being asked to offer. And if teachers are burning out at that rate and leaving the profession, they're not getting what they need. And I've worked with a number of teachers in my private practice in terms of coaching and leadership work, but also in group work, so reflective practice, CPD, all of these things with groups of teachers to help them think about the work that they're doing, inclusion. And what I have found is when I bring a group of teachers together, depending on how held and secure and supported they feel within their unit, so their school, will dictate to what degree they can engage in this material in a way that they can bring in to work with their students and to engage with each other as peers. Actually, it's very, like, because I use very similar training or very similar research in my work, it's very rarely the content I deliver, but actually the environment in which they're functioning within. And I think that's true for most people. The environment we function in either sets us up to succeed or fail, and sometimes we don't always know what to do with that. And that's where organizational development or cultural interventions can be really helpful. But they do involve senior leaders being ready and able for the difficult conversations and listening in a different way. Now, why I wanted to speak to Orla around education was I thought her survey was really interesting. It was what was teachers' experience of leadership in schools. And I thought that was really interesting because I would always say our first experience of leaders is at home, whoever our parents are, and however we engage with them or don't engage with them, or whoever raised us. All of those things are our first experience of leadership. Our second experience of socialization and leadership is schools. And so when we go into a classroom, our teacher is often leading us, directing us, managing us. And as somebody who's dyslexic and understands the world and processes information in a different way to the education system here that was designed, that I was moving through, hopefully they're shifting it, I can be quite aligned with expecting teachers to be more aligned with emotional intelligence and universal design for learning than they're being exposed to within their workplace. And the reason I hold this position is because that's what I needed. So I'm aware that that's what other students need. But I also hold that position because when we think about meeting students' needs and we think about learning in different ways and we think about appreciating different intelligences and different skills and different strengths, in that there's also room for the teacher to be themselves and to appreciate where their strengths and weaknesses are and to validate themselves outside of academic validation. And I just think it's really important when we think about the education system. Yes, people can put their kids into different education systems, but generally you're being measured against whatever is deemed nationally the standards. And it is important to think about the environments that our students are going into, who are going to go into our workplaces and be the people I deal with at another point, and be the colleagues and be the decision makers and the voters, that they are so much more than just students in that moment, and that teachers are so much more than just teaching the subject. But if teachers have such a high level of unmet needs, then it's really unfair to expect them to do something more when they're already burning out, literally, like over 80%. You need to go back and follow Orla's stuff. But I suppose from my point of view, if I step back and I look at it from an organizational development and performance lens, to ask a group of people to do something that they aren't experiencing is to set them up for resentment, to set them up for burning out, to set them up for self-blame, imposter syndrome, all of these things. And what I think might be more helpful for us to think about is, what are the unmet needs of all of the stakeholders to ensure that everyone involved is playing their part and fulfilling their role? And I think if we want classrooms that are more inclusive and people are learning more effectively based on their learning kind of needs, then we need to also think about the people providing the learning and how are they being supported or not supported. During the summer, I went to a conference for Universal Design for Learning, which is basically inclusive education. And they were launching a project. And so there was a school there of teachers who were talking about their implementation of it. And what I really admired about those teachers was, one of the teachers said, the biggest challenge I had was realizing that my job is to facilitate the learning, not to tell them what to learn or how to learn. And it got me thinking about how we do it in organizations. Sometimes we go in and we tell people what to do and how to do it rather than facilitating how they do it. And I think that's what Orla's talk and research is pointing to. That is also true across other organizations. And also, I was kind of astounded by the fact that if there's any other organization with that level of burnout, where 80% of respondents were able to say they have witnessed somebody burn out, and like 83 or something were able to say they know someone who left the profession, we would be having major interventions organizationally. So what is it about schools and about our education system that we're not having those conversations? And I'm going to leave you with that question. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, but I do really wonder, why is that level of witnessing burnout so normalized in education, and it wouldn't be in other industries? We would be doing a big review of that, and we would be saying, what's happening here? So I leave you with that question, and I'd love to hear your answers. You know, you can link to me at Sheila Walsh 1 on any of the platforms, but also you can comment in the show notes, and you can give it a like and a share and all of that jazz. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.